One is, let's just talk about lifespan for a second, very quickly, and how lifespan in any population is determined. Lifespan in a population is the average age of death. And so what we know is that it's very difficult to increase lifespan by adding years on to people's already maximum lifespan. So if you take a bunch of people who are 70 and you add, 5 years to those people, well, then you've only added 5 years of lifespan. And that's if you did it for everybody. So the way that lifespan has always changed dramatically, average lifespan, meaning average age of death, is by changing infant mortality or changing the death of young people. Because if you could imagine that instead of somebody dying at age 2, they now die at age 70, you've added 68 years to the average lifespan statistic for that population. So we always know that the way to add lifespan, average lifespan, is to change to reduce the number of young people dying. Okay, a couple of things. The other thing is that it's a myth that people didn't live long. I mean, how long did Queen Victoria live? How long did Native Americans live? We know that the reason people died, our ancestors died, was not chronic illness. It wasn't cancer. It wasn't diabetes. And the argument is that the incorrect argument is, well, it must be because they didn't live long enough. No, about 20% of them lived well into old age. But the ones who died young didn't die of things that would have been solved by a pill or by modern medicine. They got eaten by a tiger or gored by a rhino or a wildebeest or whatever. Or they broke a leg and got a deep infection, correct? So they weren't dying of the things that 80 to 90% of our health costs are going towards, which is chronic illness. They weren't dying of chronic illness. So the reason that we live longer now has nothing to do with medicine. It has mostly to do with sanitation and refrigeration, to be honest. And by the way, that's also in the peer-reviewed literature and in my book. Everything that you've talked about, these are all the things I've covered in my book because for me, Ari, and I'm probably the same for you, I had to ask myself these questions. In other words, I'm always the hardest on myself before I feel like I've kind of got this thing right. I'm a big doubter, right? All my hypotheses are null. I always assume I'm wrong until proven otherwise, right? And the other thing I like to tell people is just get away from the ancestral health thing for a minute. Just think biology. Ancestral health is really, it's an unnecessary term because it's just biology. If we just study humans like we study every other species on Earth, why do we have to call it ancestral? Mm-hmm. Right? It's just a popular kind of term right now, and I get it, but it's actually superfluous. It's unnecessary, right? It's a descriptor it's absolutely not required. Let's just study biology. And if we study biology, what do we know? We know, and then so if we want to look at lifespan, so our ancestors before we moved into big cities, the average lifespan was about 40, and that average lifespan was 40 because youth died and because people were injured, right? They got broken legs or whatever. There was no emergency care, right? So, and there was no sanitation, but that doesn't really come into play until after we were hunter-gatherers. And then we moved into large cities. Our lifespan went from 40 to 20 on average, right? In fact, today in Calcutta, there's some places, for instance, that now the average lifespan is really, really low. And so, and that's because we lived in crowded cities and sanitation was bad. And we had to then get a bunch of food to these people, but there was no refrigeration. It was terrible. So when we got refrigeration and sanitation, that's what really, and we got rid of accidents, right? We live a very safe, cushy life now. So we don't get in a lot of accidents and die, but our life is so cushy that we have a lot of time to develop chronic illness. So now we die of chronic illness, but chronic illness takes longer to kill you than a rhinoceros goring you. That's why we're living longer. And I might add, all these chronic illnesses that we talk about, the most rapid increase in chronic illness are amongst our youth. Breast cancer is not an illness of elderly women. Obesity is not heart disease. These are not things that are killing people at 90. We know that all the chronic illnesses are rising most rapidly in young people. So the idea that you could blame chronic illness on the fact that we're living longer makes no sense statistically or biologically. That's just not true and is proven to be false in the literature.